just a little bit of an overview of the meeting this evening. The talk topic is really the importance of a hazard identification and risk assessment at a dive business or any business really, and just some useful tips to really get started with a HIRA. I spoke to Ken and I asked him if we can keep it to about 20 or 30 minutes and allow some questions afterwards, so that we don't go on for too long. Now, for those that don't know, I'd like to introduce Ken Annadale to you guys. He's from a company, or he started a company called INTRA, or some might know it as INTRA Safe or INTRA Training, but now it just goes by the name of INTRA. And Ken has actively been involved in health and safety training for over 25 years. And he's also the author of the bestseller, Movers, Shakers, Moaners and Groaners, and the 1 Minute Safety Manager. And he's also a former drug squad cop, naval officer, NOSHA consultant, audiometrist, radio announcer, and university group communication skills lecturer. He's the producer and presenter of various training videos, and he's also married to Penny Jones. And Ken is a team building leader, scuba dive master, and master firewalk facilitator, and a lot more. Anyways, with that said, we're in for a great discussion this evening, and I'm sure you're really going to enjoy it. With that said, I'm going to hand over to Ken. Welcome. Thank you for your time, Ken, and we look forward to the discussion this evening.
Fantastic, fantastic. And thank you for that introduction. Those things I did in the first half of my life. Okay. I've got a whole bunch of things that I want to do in the next half of my life. Oh, awesome. There's a ton of things. I just want to quickly put the record straight. I'm no longer a dive master. It expired a while ago, and I just dive for pleasure at the moment. So I'm not DMing at all, but I thoroughly enjoyed something like 25 years of diving alone in the Western Cape, and I love that. So what I want to do is I want to just quickly start off with a story. My brother-in-laws, 3 of them, from the family, sailed the fastest boat in Cape Town, a boat called Jacana, from Royal Cape Yacht Club. And on an occasion, I got this phone call, and Tim said to me, would you like to go sailing with us? We need some more crew members, so just a bum on the bench kind of thing, to provide some weight. And it's Wednesday afternoon, and come down to the yacht club. And I did. And I went down to the yacht club, and I've never, ever sailed on a keelboat as a participant in a race. I've sailed on keelboats, but there we are. There was no briefing. There was no assessment. There was no HIRA. There was no life jacket. There was no safety lines. There's this stripped down, amazing vessel. I think Hollard are the sponsors of this vessel. And there was an assumption, because I could, and I did previously, I sailed dinghies. There was an assumption that I knew what was going on. Haha. Well, we had passed Robben Island. We went about, we came back, and in the process of going about, it's a large crew. It's about, gosh, I think it's about a dozen people. Everybody has to clamber over onto the other side as you're going about to even the weight out. And the skipper's either boss or partner was a little slower than everybody else. So I hung back to let him go through. And as I was going through, I lost my footing and slipped under the rail, and I was in the water. Now, it wasn't so bad, because I've been in False Bay and I've been in Table Bay, and while it's cold, I didn't panic at all because of having been in the water so much in my life. But what I didn't realize is that this flipping Jacana is trotting towards Cape Town Harbour, leaving me behind. And I'm thinking, no life jacket, but I can swim, and I didn't panic at all. However, skipper was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. That's why they win almost every single race. He came straight back at me, and all of a sudden I saw this bow coming to me at quite a speed. And I didn't know what to do other than some of the training that I did in the Navy, and of course, as a diver. And they threw a line, I caught the line, and I was almost surfing or skiing behind Jacana. They hauled me on board, dumped me, and the skipper just shouted, "We're racing!" Reflecting on that afterwards, I realized that could have been a fatality. And Penny might have enjoyed all the insurance money, and she would have been able to find another husband, and they could have lived happily ever after in Mauritius. But I reflected on that often, because I'm supposed to be the health and safety guy. I'm supposed to be somebody that has dived, I mean, I had it how many hundreds of times. I'm supposed to be the one that knows these things, and I should have done something about it at the time. When the lads were getting ready to sail, I should have gone, hey, what about me? I don't know anything. It just turned out that there were a couple of other people like me on the vessel. Now, That would have been an ideal situation to do a rapid, immediate HIRA, just there and then. Who's got what skills, who's got what competencies, who's got what experience, and what could happen, and if it happened, this is what is going to happen. You know, it's all of those sorts of things. But there wasn't any time for it, or it just never entered their minds. Be that as it may, because I fell overboard, I had to pay for the beer. And it was over 1,200 rands worth of beer because we lost the race by about 20 seconds. We caught up, made up the time, but lost it. And so I was out of pocket. So there was a smile. And every time I go to the Royal Cape Yacht Club, they go, "Oh, you're the bugger that fell off Jacana." I go, "Yeah, I'm so sorry." Any case, having said that, there is a process that one can follow, and I'm going to share that with you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen. And I want to share it in such a way that you can learn a couple of lessons from this entire thing. You know, if you think of any organization, whether it's domestic or industrial, you think of commercial, you think of sporting groups, you think of yourselves in the industry, you think of any person going somewhere, doing something where there is remotely a chance of an incident taking place. We as responsible people and parents, we should be focused at preparing for eventualities such as that. Now, I do know for a fact that there are going to be times when you're not able to do it. And I do know for a fact, I just want to move these pictures out of the way there. I do know for a fact that you're going to have to respond rapidly. So we'll talk about this thing called hazard identification and risk assessment and where it comes from and how we're going to deal with it and why we need it in the workplace. And essentially, it's a management tool. It's a technique to keep people safe and keep the business running and to maintain continuity and all of those sorts of things. We know that whether it's in the workplace or in the home and domestic or even in clubs and associations and places like that, there are these dangers, hazards, and risks. And those are three important words that we must just consider, because there's a difference between a danger, a hazard, and a risk. Then, of course, knowing what the dangers, hazards, and risks are, you can forewarn people, you can plan for it, you can write safe work procedures, and so forth. You can also determine whether your organization has a greater or lesser chance of continuing through this incident that may take place. Then, of course, we are in a position, if we know the dangers, hazards, and risks and started profiling them and writing them down, we can then literally publish it, publicize it, and so forth. And we can manage and mitigate and monitor these things. So I happened to be in Manchester. Penny was working on the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony, and a mate of mine who was previously at Appletiser, he had retired back to the UK and he was working at an organization, a paint factory. And he invited me down there, and Jock, the late Jock Wood, said to me, "Come down to the factory and I'll just show you around this factory." And I did. I arrived there. But what was so striking is I arrived at the gate at the security where the taxi dropped me off. And there was this huge board and said, "You're entering this workplace. These are the dangers, hazards, and risks you're going to be exposed to." At the gate. Then they took me through, and I arrived at Jock's office in the maintenance section, and there was a sign on the door, on the wall at least, and it said, "These are the dangers, hazards, and risks you're going to be exposed to as you enter this place," and together with the procedures, what protective equipment. And I thought that's really profound, because they'd taken the time of actually publishing it and saying, "These are the dangers, hazards, and risks. Are you willing to enter it? And if you are willing to enter it, this is what you're going to have to do." And I thought that's a very clever way of managing it. Okay, those of you that know the Occupational Health and Safety Act may know it comprises of three primary sections. There's the Act, the regulations, and the standards. The Act is signed by the President. The regulations by the Minister, and the standards can either come from the Chief Inspector or some other standards organization which we would adopt, and then we'd use them. And it's useful to know that. We also know that in the legislation, every piece of legislation starts with definitions. And I'm not going to touch on all the definitions, but danger, hazard, and risk are very important. So when we dissect this, we can see that a danger is almost anything. And if you think of a dive operation, you think of anybody that's running boats, you think of people that loading and unloading, you just think of those of you that have resorts where people actually reside at the resort and so forth. Anything which may. And that is a massive spectrum, and we'll touch on some of those things. It's literally from the gate right through to the quayside and then onto the vessel or the boat or wherever it might be. But then you may be sending people out to go and get supplies and resources and things like that. Anything which may. That's the key word. The next one is hazard, and there it speaks of a source of or exposure to the danger. So if you think of a chemical substance, that's a source of. Anybody using the chemical substance, handling it or storing it or transporting it, that's exposure. And then the last one is risk. And the key word here is, what's the probability that something could occur? And you'll see in a short while that you can actually rate these things, you can measure them, and you can actually determine high, medium, and low, and so forth. So those three words are critical to the whole HIRA process. Now, I'm not going to get into the legislation, but Section 8 of the Act is a very important one. Those of you that have recently been involved in some other way with Mornay and the COVID-19 training, you'll know that they now rate the COVID virus as a hazard. It's not a danger, it's a hazard. And of course, we know that they have things like risk assessments in the entire process. And Mornay, well done with all the work that you've been doing on COVID-19. So well done. Who knows what the effect of that's going to ultimately be, but I'm sure that you've already had some significant impact on people's lives. Okay, so bear with me as I just quickly run through it. It says every employer shall provide, maintain a workplace that is safe and healthy and risk-free. And then it talks about the work environment and systems of works and plant and machinery. And it says the employer must take the necessary steps to mitigate the hazards and potential, and then issue PPE. So mitigation of hazards and potential, very important. Now, it's a funny little thing over here. It's almost like Section 2B should have actually been in the next portion, because there it says that the employer must establish what the hazards are. Previously, they said you must mitigate. So be that as it may, the employer, he or she, must establish the hazards attached to any work performed, article or substance produced, processed, used, handled, stored, or transported, any plant or machinery used, and then the precautionary measures to be taken, and then provide the necessary means to apply such measures, blah, 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 like information, instruction, training, and supervision. Now, when you go back to the definitions, you'll see things like the word plant and machinery. Well, that'll come up a lot. Plant is basically anything that's fixed to the ground. Machinery is anything that moves around, pretty much. Anything that you can move around, and that's a very broad-based definition of it. But then they will talk of articles and substances. And I was recently, we had a fire in our generator, and the generator had been running a long time, and it heated up, and the diesel started boiling, and it was almost impossible to extinguish. And fortunately, the fire brigade came along just as the diesel ran out. So thankfully, and this is at a guest house that we were staying at, but there you can immediately go. The employer shall establish the hazards attached to the work performed, and the articles and substances produced, processed. So if you think of your industry, what articles and substances, what are you producing, processing, using, handling, storing, or transporting? And what are other people bringing onto the premises that you could or should be taking into account? Then what plant and machinery you have. And Mornay mentioned that I was in the drug squad. So when I was in the drug squad, it was like the plant that used to smoke. So that different kind of plant. But this plant over here, of course, is that piece of equipment that, like compressors, like generators, like anything of that nature that you'd bolt to the ground or to the wall or something like that. Then the precautionary measures, that's the interesting thing. We talk about safe work procedures, and then it finishes off by saying you must train the people. Okay, so now this process of identifying the risks there's three basic principles, but they are, in my opinion, just a management function. Every single manager or owner or business director or anybody in charge of anybody should be doing this. So we'll be talking about a thing called a baseline, but there are different ones, and you could imagine where you need to do a continuous or ongoing risk assessment or an issue-based risk assessment. So on the yacht, there should have been a continuous and ongoing risk assessment. New crew, novices, let's take the necessary steps to make sure that these people are going to be safe. Okay, then we've got, it says 3 classes of hazards, and I don't know why I wrote 3. I must have had too much to drink last night at the attorney's house. But it's 4, if you hadn't noticed that, and I'm scratching my head why I put up 3. But it's important to know that some hazards are obvious. You don't need to have a trained eye to see them. Some are not obvious, they are hidden. Sometimes there's a combination of hazards. And then, of course, there are new hazards that are coming to the fore all the time, which we didn't know anything about. COVID, that is a typical one of an emerging hazard. So I'm going to give you some examples. To get into a little detail, I define occupational safety as those things that you can see that have afflicted the individual. And if there's broken bones or blood, if there's any sort of body fluids, if there's anything that you can patch, fix, change, and of course, I don't want to mention it, but if anybody dies, it's obvious. You really don't need to be a rocket scientist to see that. And they fall into a couple of categories, like the physical environment, slips, trips, falls, bumps, and things like that. Then all the mechanical stuff. that could injure you. Once again, you've got plant and machinery that could injure you, but there are also other things. Some of you have trailers, and those trailers are heavy, and people who have to pick up the hitch of the trailer and put it onto a truck or a tractor or something like that, that's flipping heavy. Then, of course, electrical and chemical. Now, the chemical isn't so much the dusts and the gases and the mists and things like that. We'll get to that. This is chemical where it could burn you, and or you could obviously come into contact with it, and there's problems with the chemicals. Okay, so that's the safety stuff. And we can go through a whole list of the outcomes as a result of it. I'm not going to read them to you because they're quite obvious, though, but that's where you would call a first aider, or you would call an ambulance, or you would call the mortician. And that comes as a result of working in an environment where the necessary steps had not been taken. Very sad to say, although while we're here in Mauritius, there was an explosion at the Annadale munitions plant in Somerset West. Oh gosh, that was probably about 7 or 8 months ago. Some of you remember that. And I think 8 people died. Now, they, as a munitions factory, were constantly, and I know them, constantly doing HIRAs, hazard identification and risk assessment, doing it over and over and over and over, but people become complacent. There is a story that went like this, is that these lads who were working on a Friday afternoon, hadn't completed the job, said that they would volunteer to come back on the Saturday. All the safe work procedures and permits and everything like are in place for the Friday. And on the Saturday morning, apparently, forgive me if I got all the detail a little bit mixed up there, they started work without taking the necessary precautions, or once again doing a HIRA. And this massive explosion killed 8 people. You just think, damn, I mean, that should never, ever, ever have happened. Now, at that stage, what happens is that generally the chief executive officer would make a statement, and he or she would say, it will never happen again. We'll make sure that, that's like, yeah. It's almost like a script. It's almost like a script. Bus accident, bus strikes, taxi, 15 people die in the taxi, 60 people die in the bus, and we'll investigate this and it'll never happen again, until the next time. So common sense and taking responsibility and constantly being besotted almost about the HIRA process is critical. And if you're a parent, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, then the occupational health side. Now, this is anything that happens on the inside, so we can't see this. We can't see the effect on people. And of course, biological, like we've just seen with COVID, or ergonomical, or chemical, or physiological, and even psychological. And Mona and I were just talking about the fact that the whole COVID-19 thing has affected people in a way that we never ever, the strong are being affected by it as a result of COVID. Okay, so some of the things that you will come across in the the health side are things like dusts and gases and fumes and moisture and noise and mists and poisons and things of that nature, and of course biological hazards as well. And these are where people will ingest or absorb them through their skin. And one may think, well, that may not apply to me, but here's an interesting truth. May not apply to the guest as much as it will to the employee. And if the employee works in an environment where these things are evident and they're there and they're constantly inhaling or ingesting or things of that nature, it then manifests in years to come. And those of you that, any of you have a bad back as a result of inappropriate posture or lifting techniques, this is all a health hazard. And here's a shocking fact. The World Health Organization says, International Labour Organization says, there's about 2.5 million deaths every year as a result of occupational injuries and diseases. Of that, only 500,000 are injuries. 2 million or thereabouts are diseases, and it normally manifests when the person is older, maybe even in retirement. So now you imagine, well, gosh, what are you absorbing or ingesting? What are you exposed to? And your team, what are they exposed to? And the reality is that you may not see it now, but it's coming. Okay, and then there's the last one, which is the environmental hazards. And the Occupational Health and Safety Act doesn't really speak to this. There's another piece of legislation called NEMA, and it speaks to this. But once again, those of you that are particularly conscious of this, this whole issue, and Mona and I were just touching on the oil spill here in Mauritius, these things will definitely impact on the operation and the continuity of the business, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. Okay, so those are them just very, very quickly. So what I did is I sat down, did some research, and I drew up a list of all the dangers, hazards, and risks I could think of. And I'm a researcher, so I did a fair amount of exploration, and I came up with this list. And what I did as well is I sent the list to Mornay earlier today. And if you want to get this list from him, Mornay, you can gladly share it with the guys afterwards. No problem at all. But let's just run through some of these topics over there: fire and environment, nuclear and hygiene and explosions and chemical and physical and biological and so forth. You know, if you think of it, things like ergonomics, we've only just recently got the ergonomics regulation in South Africa. It came through in December. And then, of course, that was waylaid by the whole COVID-19 thing. Now, there's the list. And you can see those headings over there. And then you can see the subheadings. And just to make the HIRA process easy, I'm going to suggest that you print it and you go through that with a highlighter and just highlight the things that could present dangers, hazards, and risks. And then from there, that's just going to be a subjective thing. From there, you can start scoring them and you can prioritize them and you can go, this category is a real problem for us. And it's going to raise some issues there that you may never have thought of in the past. So I'm going to show you some examples of it. And the first category I'm going to have a look at are obvious. You can see it. That's a safety hazard and obviously the piece of equipment. Now remember, plant and equipment and so forth. There's a piece of equipment and that's badly damaged and shouldn't be anywhere in the workplace, because that will break at some other stage. Might not from the weight of the individual, but it might probably break if the individual is carrying a heavy load. Then, of course, we've got the whole environmental issue and the pollution and smoke and fire and also all the issues. Now, here in Mauritius, are big issues. We collect plastic every single week that washes up on our beaches, comes from elsewhere in the world. And some of that plastic has been at sea for donkey's years, and I kid you not. We find shoes and toothbrushes and lighters, and we find lots and lots of plastic toys, lots of bottles. And some of them you can see have been eaten by turtles or bit into by turtles. You can see how the sea life have been trying to ingest and have ingested all this rubbish. Absolutely scary, to say the least. Now, we just do it because, you know, one person can make a difference. And if we've got 1,000 people doing exactly the same thing in the area, we can make a difference. But having said that, we need to be very conscious of things like that smoke. Have a look at the smoke over there. You'll see that the black smoke represents a fossil fuel that's burning. That's the fossil fuel. That's not a natural vegetation or something like that. Then, of course, in and around your environment, you might find all kinds of other activities that are taking place. So noise is one of the problems. And we know that people that work in compressor rooms, it's noisy inside there. It might be above 75 decibels. It might be something that the person is exposed to morning, noon, and night, because they're also listening to their own music and noise, and it combines and impacts on them. And that's one of my specialities, is audiometry. But if you consider your neighbors' activities and how they may affect you, it's a serious problem. That's an obvious one. Everybody knows that. Gosh, we see that all around the world. I mean, it's just everywhere, that either somebody tried to steal the electricity, or it just decayed and fell apart. And that's shocking. So having said that, what about this? Now, that looks like most of our garages, guys. We've got this combination of dangerous substances: handled, stored, used, transport. Remember the piece of legislation. And if you look at those items over there, many of them have safety signs on them or health signs on them, but most of us don't read them. In fact, if I may say this, and this is an indictment on myself, most of us don't have fire extinguishers at home. And if we do, we don't have an obviously good fire extinguisher with sufficient firefighting agent in it. And I told you about the compressor the generator that was burning. We had 3 dry powder extinguishers in the entire house, and they were way inadequate, couldn't do it. The irony is that the generator was about 15 paces away from the gas bank. So if it got out of hand, it's called a BLEVE, boiling liquid expansion vapor explosion. Okay, so having said that, then there's ventilation and extraction. This may or may not be appropriate if you have a compressor room, and obviously you need to extract the fumes and get it out of the room so that the person isn't exposed to it. And of course, we all know about filling cylinders. Then disposal. Once again, it's a common thing. It happens all the time. People just pour it down the drain. And I would go as far as saying that we're all guilty of it. You clean paintbrushes, now what do you do with the thinners? What do we do? I store it in a glass bottle until the next time, and then eventually you can't use it anymore. Now what do we do with it? And that's the reality. That is absolutely the reality. Now, it's not only the chemicals, but there's also cleaning agents and things like that, which are quite toxic. Machine guards, and if you have compressors and any other equipment that have belts and pulleys and drives and things like that that need to be guarded. So these are obvious things, and it doesn't take a degree to look at it and go, that's not right. Obviously, fire escapes blocked, spillage. Here again, temperature in the workplace and some of the extremes that people have to work in from time to time, indoors and outdoors. Then vibrating machinery. This may not be applied to you as much as it does to some other people, but people that work with equipment, gardening equipment and things like that often find that this is a problem. Then moving on, we can have a look at some concealed hazards. And electricity is the first one that I want to quickly touch on, because this is a problem. And if you know anything about electricity, you'll know you have a live and an earth and you have a neutral. And sometimes you find that people do not know how to wire these things up, or they have taken shortcuts, or the equipment is now faulty, or it's not connected to the distribution board. And I discovered something here the other day, that we can switch off our distribution board, but the pool pump runs. You can switch off everything on the distribution board. That's shocking. I mean, it's like literally, and there's no pun intended there. It is absolutely shocking. And so if I have a high pressure cleaner here because everything goes moldy in a week. So I had every intention of actually cleaning out the pump house with this high pressure cleaner. And somebody said to me, do you know that the pump's still running? I went, damn. Okay, so polarity is critical, and also earthing is critical. And now, because it's concealed, we have to actually use instrumentation to do it. Similarly, there are all these other things that we can't see, and we have to use, in some instances, an inspection authority, an authorized inspection authority, or a laboratory or someone like that, or a technician to actually identify it to see whether we've got it there or not. And you know about numerous diseases like Legionnaire's disease that comes from air conditioning units, and you know about the cleaning of tanks, water tanks, and things of that nature. So again, can't see it, can't touch it, can't taste it, can't smell it, can't even see it in the water, but it's there. And then fumes. Fumes are a huge thing. And you may or may not know that diesel has now been declared a carcinogen. Diesel fumes, carcinogen. Okay. Then, wow, we see this all the time, don't we? And there are so many people that actually allow it to happen in and around their environment. And if you think of some of the substances that you might even be washing equipment with it. And then we do what with it? And where does it go? And, you know, I think most divers, almost every single diver I know, they're super conscious of the ecology and the environment and things like that. But what do we do with the contents of the tank or the container that we've been washing our equipment in? And what substance are we using in there when washing it? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, then there's noise, and particularly high frequency noise, which we can't actually hear, can't be detected, but it's there. And we know about that. If you think of anybody in the aviation industry, it's a massive problem. Anybody that's close to an engine all the time, droning away, it's a problem. It can be compounded. Then lighting and ventilation, that too is a problem, especially for people that are working in factories or indoors or studying or places like that. We've heard of recently lots and lots and lots of buildings collapsing. And it's just absolutely, it's horrifying to think of it. Now, the explosion that took place in Lebanon a while ago, do you know that it was probably obvious, but it was concealed because it had been there so long, and it should never have happened. And then people they want to hang the next president, and I go, that's just not. Any case, let me not get into that one. All right. Then something that we have, and all of us see from time to time, are dusts and fumes and gases and mists and vapors, things that we can, when I say see, because you can actually see them in some instances, in other instances you can smell them. And while we as human beings have evolved over the last 200-300 years, we have not developed any sort of immunity to these substances, nothing whatsoever, especially as we see new ones arising all the time. Now, let's combine them together and we go have a look at this. So just look at that environment. So there was an ignition source, there were gases, there was unauthorized work, no safe work procedure, and there was an explosion. Killed 2 people. You go, for goodness sake, guys, goodness gracious me, have a look at the amount of cylinders in and around that building. On the left-hand side, next to that blue bin that says SOS, there are cylinders there. Have a look on the right-hand side. There are gas cylinders on the right-hand side, the green one, and that could be Freon. I'm not sure what it is, and other cylinders. You go, a little bit of mitigation, a little bit of planning, a little bit of management. In fact, I'll just share something with you. I was fortunate enough to work at NOSA, and an old, wizened advisor said this: if you want to know whether an organization's health and safety program works, go to 3 places. You go to the staff toilets. If you would use the staff toilet, and he said, if your wife would sit down on that loo, then that manager is running their plant properly. He said, go to the rubbish tip and see whether that's being run properly, and then go and have a look at the vehicles. If the vehicles are clean and tidy and maintained, those 3 things will tell you whether the health and safety program is working. And I tell you what, I've seen that over and over and over again. Okay, here's another combination of bad lighting, bad seating, electromagnetic radiation, ergonomics, physical stress, which obviously affect people. More and more people have this thing called tunnel carpal syndrome, where they can't use their hands anymore, and it becomes debilitating. Okay, so there was an accident waiting to happen. This is at Mary Spruit. It was a long time ago. And they had this slag dam, and the wall broke and killed, I think, 23 people, 22 people. And you think, come on, for goodness sake. And that's where the HIRA, the continual ongoing thing, monitoring, and I mean, who would build that village there? In fact, the village was probably before the dam. So who would build a dam there? Okay, so now you're starting to get an idea of the kinds of dangers, hazards, and risks we have in the workplace. And then, of course, we've got a whole bunch of new ones. Asbestos was the product, the wonder product. And in fact, that's the Twin Towers, and you all know the story of that. It says here, when the fire alarm went off, it took 2 hours to evacuate New York's World Trade Center. This is long before 9/11. That building was full of asbestos. They bragged about it. Now we go, asbestos? Hell no, we'll run a mile when we see asbestos. But at the time, they thought it was a fantastic product. Now we have exactly the same thing. We have products in the marketplace that we think fantastic, wonderful, amazing, incredible, such clever people, but they will kill us at some other stage, or not us, but maybe employees. Then, of course, asbestos, as we know it, appears in so many different building materials, and I'm going to strongly urge you to check that out. And it appears in filters and even clothing. Then, of course, we had diesel fumes, and I told you about the International Labour Organization, the World Health Organization. We know about smoking, both passive smoking as well as active smoking, electromagnetic radiation, which is still untested. And they have this statement which they make, there's no empirical evidence. Well, you go, hang on, dude. This thing gets really hot when it's on GPS. What's going on there? Why is it getting hot? What's generating the heat? And if I constantly got it against my ear, or in one instance, I went on a road trip with a large transport company, and I was in a workshop at Ladysmith or someplace like that, and this lady, she was pregnant, and she had her cell phone on a lanyard on top of the baby. I don't know, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's convenient to say nothing will happen. We just don't know. Okay. Then, of course, genetic modification, we know about that. And there are people that are being exposed to all kinds of things. And right now we've got this whole debate around vaccines and so forth. Then there's nanotechnology, which we're starting to see and hear about. And people are blaming, what's his name, Gates and Fauci and, oh gosh. But the technology exists and it's there. We just don't know what the effect is going to be on people's lives. Then, of course, we've just had COVID, and everybody knows about COVID. This slide was created a long time before COVID, but now we've really got a scare. Thankfully, COVID has made people aware of the health and safety stuff in the workplace. And lastly, I just want to talk about this continuous HIRA. Now, I'm just using this photograph over here to depict a workplace. And you'll know that there is a flow from the gate to the gate. Produce in, produce out. People in, people out. Equipment in, equipment out. And if you just think about that, when you're doing a HIRA, it's not a walkabout. It's not an inspection. You're fooling yourself if you're just doing an inspection. I was at a mine one day, and they did a HIRA around this huge piece of mining equipment. I mean, the tires are the size of a building. And this youngster was walking around with a clipboard, and he was doing a HIRA. And I said to him, so what's the story over here? And he said, oh, this is our daily HIRA. And I go, dude, this is what you should be doing. From the equipment on the left-hand side top corner over there, right down to where the produce leaves the factory or the mine or the workplace. Every single step of the way needs HIRA. Every single step of the way. Now, if you think of it, Monet, you know those gazebo things on the aluminium legs? You kind of like put them up and you... So think of it this way. Where that vehicle is on the left-hand side top corner over there, you put your tent, your table, your laptop, your camera, your recording device, and your tubrukis. Take your tubrukis with you and sit and watch the process. Could be a day. Then you go to the raw materials and spend some time there. Then you go to the conveyor, as you just follow the little red arrows, and spend a day there. And maybe if this is a night shift kind of operation, you spend 24 hours there. And you go morning, afternoon, evening, night shift to see what's going on. So you understand that process every single step of the way. And then when you're there, you can break it down even further. And you sit inside there get yourself a comfortable chair. You're going to be doing a lot of sitting around. And you sit and you watch and you observe and you talk to the people, and that's the way a HIRA is done. Some HIRAs could be as long as 3 months. Just think about it. It's not a walkabout. Now, in your instance, you don't have 15,000 employees, so you don't have to spend that amount of time there, but maybe 3 days, just focusing on HIRA, looking for the dangers, the hazards, and risks. Now, remember it said up front there in section 8, you must also establish the precautionary measures. So you need to have safe work procedures written for every single one of those steps, if you're following the letter of the law, and safe work procedures for every single one of those steps. Some organizations have, because they're compelled to, they have people called health and safety representatives. And while I like the health and safety rep concept, generally the health and safety rep would receive 1 day's training for 2 years worth of service. They won't know this stuff. So don't rely on them to do it. You do it. If you're the owner or the manager, you do it. Don't nominate or delegate somebody to do this. You do it. And as you do it, you're going to discover stuff about your organization that you probably didn't know in the past. You're going to see things, you go, oh gosh, this needs maintenance or maintaining. And we didn't know about that. And look what's happening over here. I love the backyards. I love scratching around in the backyard and finding things that have just been dumped there and they've been there for the past 12 months. I also developed a concept called clean dirt and dirty dirt. Clean dirt is today, maybe the last 2-3 days worth of dirt because you're doing stuff there. Dirty dirt is stuff that's been there for 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years. And get rid of the dirty dirt. Big focus on housekeeping because if you can clean the place, you can see the hazards. Okay, then of course we've just spoken about a couple of things like the causes and exposure to the hazards, clearly. We haven't spoken about risks yet, but the control mechanisms and precaution measures that need to be put in place. And we've spoken about the impacts on the individual or the company and so forth. Now there are a couple of words over here, 3 words that I wanted to highlight to you. The word probability, because we saw that in the definition of risk, frequency, and severity. Those 3 things are things that you can measure. You can measure probability, you can measure frequency, and you can measure severity. And you can then set it as a goal and drive it down. And the last 2 are we ready for when the popo hits the fan? Are we ready? And I know we were just talking about the Wakashio here. Were they ready? Well, speaking to an attorney last night, he says they had no clue. And this is not something that happens frequently. So why should they have a huge standby just in case something happens again in another 50 years? It's got a point, you know. It's got a point. Now, of course, what they will do is they will put things and measures in place. The worst thing that could have happened with us and the Wakashio is that it happened in COVID-19. We've been COVID-free for, I think it's 102 days or something like that. And all of a sudden, to come and deal with this other problem, we have to bring in people from COVID-infected countries. And that's why the South Africans couldn't come in. Thank God I'm not a politician. Hey? Tell you what, Monet, you want to be a politician, but that's your game. No, he's not a politician. But wow, okay. So that's quite something. So the preparedness and then the ability to recover. Now, I want to quickly introduce you as I'm starting to wrap up here is this thing called the hierarchy of control. And there's a process that one can follow. Once you know what the hazard is, to eliminate the risk, you'd firstly remove the hazard or replace the hazard with something else, or redesign it, retrain people, regulate it, supervise it, and finally issue PPE. Finally issue PPE. And we've seen that with the COVID thing. It's almost like a funnel. We take all the information that we have and we filter it, we dump it inside the funnel, and that which comes out at the end should represent the place is healthy and safe as required in Section 8. And you can then look at your establishment, whether it's a resort or a dive school, or maybe even just your storage areas, parking areas for boats and vessels, things of that nature. And you can look at it and you can go, dangers, hazards, and risks. How are we exposed to them? Then an obvious thing that you want to do is you want to highlight it. So I introduced a thing called rag tagging. Rag tags are red, amber, and green, like the traffic light. And you take a tag and you actually attach a tag to the thing that you've identified. If it's red, that's it. We will call this activity off. If it's amber, obviously we need to take precautions and we need to notify everybody in the vicinity that there is a danger or a hazard or a risk in the workplace. If it's green, let's go. We're happy with it, we've analyzed it, and we can rock and roll with that. Okay, so just putting together a HIRA team, there is a forum. You obviously want somebody that's in charge, and that's why I said you, don't delegate it. You, this is serious, this is life-changing, life-preserving stuff, this. If we just delegate it to somebody else and go, yeah, you go and do it, ask yourself how much training you've had and how much training they've had. And respectfully, most of us don't know this stuff. We've never been through it. My background as an audiometrist and a radio announcer and all these kind of things, how did that prepare me for this? Then we have an assessor who should be trained and should be competent and capable. And then, of course, you have a look at the priorities. You go through this process. You look at that flow that we spoke about. You designate areas of responsibility because you can't do everything yourself. And once you've been through it, somebody's going to have to look after it. You can or should possibly appoint, and they're called AIAs, Authorized Inspection Authorities, especially where they have to bring instrumentation in to do the assessment. And then, of course, you determine whether there are SWPs, that's safe work procedures and policies and procedures and things like that. And, of course, the material safety data sheets. So with that in mind, you determine which one we're going to talk about. Now, and which one we're going to use. We're going to just use the baseline as an example. You have a control register, so that all this information goes into it. Remember the story about Jock Wood and the factory in Manchester? So you have that. Then you use this identification guide that Mornay can send to you, email to you if you ask him for it. You customize it so that it's relevant to your operation. You have a numbering system, so you can go back to this information and go, this is what we did, and so forth. You can have a look at any other inspections that you've had in the past, whether investigations, as in formal investigations or just inspections. Then you've tagged everything, you notify the various people, you tell the people what's going on, you diarize it, and you take action, and then you stick to that action. So there's the score sheet. And the score sheet is literally 0 to 5, 5 meaning high, medium, and low. I've actually just flummoxed myself. I'm not sure whether 5 is high or it's 0. So 5 is high, 0 is low. Morning, I'll have to check on that one for you. But once you've identified, once you've scored it, so let me just quickly go back to that. I suggest that you score it in color and use those colors, red, amber, and green. And once you've scored it, you can see whether there's a predominance of any one color. And just as a quick overview, you can go, oh, this is the thing that you would put up at the door. High, medium, and low. And you'll see severity, frequency, and probability, and you can then score it. And out of 5, each one would then tally up to 15. Then you tell everybody about it because you've done this exercise. You go through the process of putting it in your induction, putting it into your safe work procedures. If you have any contractors coming on site, you tell them this is what you're going to be exposed to. Put up the necessary signage. You might have an induction session or an orientation session at the reception area before they even go in. And then you hand them these planned job observations, task observations, and they must then do their own workplace that they're going to be working. Let me just give you an example. Anybody that's coming to service any equipment, they're technicians, they should be coming along pre-prepared. They should be familiar with basic health and safety. Okay, we tell everybody, we tell the committee if you've got one. You constantly go back and ask the question, is the score improving? Are we improving this environment? What are we doing? What modifications were made? What budgeting should we put in place? And things of that nature. And then you get to a stage where you go, right, we're going to train, and we're going to train, and we're going to train, and we're going to train. So Mornay, graciously, thank you. You said I can quickly mention my company, INTRA, we publish health and safety training material, and we equip trainers to actually do their own training. So we've got a whole process involved, and we've got over 30 training programs that we actually provide to our users, including many of which are unit standard aligned for people who want to get SACWA CETA accreditation. So if you look at some of those there, you'll see There's things like electricity and ergonomics and working at heights and fire and first aid and health and safety rep and hazard chemical substance. These make up some of those risks on that list that I sent to Mornay and that he's going to send to you. And then induction and investigation and legal liability and noise and of course now COVID as well. So with that, I think I've run out of time now, Mornay. That's about it. You can tell me what your timing is there. And then just lastly, as always, I sound like these vloggers. Please go onto our YouTube channel and click subscribe and like, and I'll be constantly sending out little snippets of information. If you're on Facebook, just search for safetyhealthtraining.com or safety training kits. Those are the two words that you can search for. Like us, tell us what you think. If it's useful, we can interact, and you can certainly pass all your questions and comments through to Mornay as well, just so that we can determine whether this is useful, whether we do anything else of the nature. But Mornay, at this stage, I want to say thank you so much to you for inviting me. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this process. And to everybody that's been listening, I see there's about 20 people out there. All the best. Go and do your HIRA. Be diligent about it. Don't be slack about it. People's lives are involved here. And I'll leave you with one last thought. It's a thought, something that I learned many years ago. It's a legal principle called diligens pater familias, the diligent father of the family. And legislation written back in the Roman times was based on the principle of that the employer is the parent. And all the employees within that organization are the family, the children. And that exact same principle applies in legislation in South Africa. We've got the Roman Dutch law, and it talks about the diligent father or diligent parent of the family. And you know and I know that if it was your kids coming onto your premises, working with your staff, going out on your vehicles and vessels, if it is your kids, you would do your damnedest to make sure they were safe. Please do that for my kids. Please do that for everybody else's kids. Look after their kids as if they were your kids. And in many instances, those kids are adults because obviously they're clients. But to somebody out there, they're still their kids. My daughter's 28 and she's my little girl. My son's 33 and he's my little boy. And with that, okay, back to Mornay.
Anyways, okay, I think it's time to wrap it up. Ken, thank you so much for your time and for all the folks that that participated this evening. If you have any questions for Ken beyond you know, what we were discussing tonight or additional to what he said after thinking about it, you're more than welcome to reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with Ken, or you can reply to the email that I'll send out tomorrow or the day after. So from my side, thank you very much, Ken. Thank you to all the folks that participated, and enjoy the rest of the evening.